system. Why is that a messy or sticky problem? Because if you give it to a computer scientist to solve, you will spend millions of dollars and probably not get a product that anyone will use. If you give it to any one group, they will only look at it from one perspective. So our college brought together people like doctors, nurses, insurance agents, administrators, computer scientists, social scientists, and so on to all sit around the table to solve the problem collectively. And that's our approach to doing kinds of research around these big, messy problems. For example, social media and its use by um, emergency or crisis responders. So this is my team, and our lab is called we call it 3C Informatics, and it's the Crisis Community and Civic Informatics Laboratory. And it's important to note that we do applied research and that our job is to solve real world problems. We don't do science for science sake. Our vision is we believe that our research has potential to help communities make use of large amounts of citizen-produced data, which in turn may improve the speed, quality, and efficiency of emergency response, leading to more lives saved. Our goal is to impact the response timeline. And if you look on the left side, you'll see the disaster response timeline today. And often there's an event, and the response comes sometime later. And if the response is to a very significant event, there can be significant harm before the response can be enacted, and then there can be significant harm afterwards as well. What we're hoping to do is shorten the time between the event and the response by providing better, more comprehensive real-time information and processing of information to responders. So today, I have three goals, three things that I want to talk about. The first is I want to demonstrate the socio-technical disruption already going on for public safety answering points. So by disruption, I mean that things are changing for PSAPs. Things are changing around PSAPs, and we will talk about what that means for the PSAP itself. Goal 2 is that I would like to encourage PSAPs to evolve from what I call reactive to proactive members of a community, and that involves looking at engaging in two-way communication or from many to many communication rather than one-way, one-to-one communication. And goal 3 is to narrow the gap between academic research and PSAP practice. So I would like to tell you a little bit about what we do and how you might be able to engage with us and other kinds of academics like us and how that might help. Okay, so disruption. So if you look at this picture, you'll see it's the same environment. It is actually at the Vatican, and these people have gone to see or listen to the Pope speak. And the difference between the top image and the bottom image is that the bottom image, just a few years later, is completely mediated through a screen. And each person in the bottom image, I'm pretty sure I haven't seen one that didn't have a device, but each person in the bottom screen is using their device to capture their experience. And that device has the ability to capture all kinds of, it could be audio, visual, it could be a variety of other text or other kinds of data, but it has a rich data source that I believe we should tap into in some way. So to give you a picture of some of the situations in which we find ourselves, how we are being disrupted, is that here is a global digital snapshot of the total population, internet users, social media users, unique mobile users, and active mobile users. So we can see that it is Even better, on the next screen, we can see that it is on the rise. Just in 1 year, so this is from January 2017, and in 1 year, since January 2016, all internet use has gone up 10%. Social media use has gone up 21%. Unique mobile users have gone up 5%, and active mobile social users have gone up 30%. And so we can see a trend that has not yet reached its peak, and we are seeing penetration of all of these services, social media as well as social data, across all of these different organizations and across different populations. Specifically, in terms of social media, we see the total number of active social media users in the billions, and active social users as a percentage of the total population, total number of social users accessing via mobile, so mobile social media, and mobile social users as a percentage of the population. Again, we will see that this is growing over time and it has not yet reached its peak. So what does this mean for PSAPs? In the past, I'm sure that all of you know, crisis communication was an established practice where there was a disaster event. The event was responded to by trained official responders. The official responders prepared a statement through a public information officer, and that was given to the media, and then the media processed that statement and eventually gave it to the public. And it followed the same pattern over and over again. If you look to the right side of the screen, you'll notice that that is in no way how information is processed now. There's no clear direction. Media may or may not play a role. Citizens are bystanders to all events, and they interact with each other and share information with each other, and they're often the first responders themselves. So, what does that mean? Social media is a disruption for these reasons. There is a smartphone in every pocket. Victims and bystanders no longer wait for official communications. Communications between officials and victims and bystanders is heterogeneous, multi-channeled, and multi-directional. There's no chain of command for information. Pre-approved official communications in the media are circumvented by social media actors. Victims and bystanders are active participants in their own rescue and response. And victims and bystanders have increased expectation for responsiveness to individual inquiry from official responders. So what does this all mean? At this point, I think I should tell a little bit of a story about how I got into this kind of research. And if we go back to 2010 and we look at the situation of the terrible earthquake in Haiti, some of my colleagues were responding through the Humanitarian Information Network, and they found themselves in Haiti inside the information tent run by the United Nations. At the time, most of the cellular phones, the phones that existed in Haiti, still worked, although there was no active 911 system. The telecommunications companies that served Haiti offered to create a 911-like texting system that used the number hashtag 4636. And they broadcast it on the radio so that anyone who needed help, who offered help, needed help, who needed any kind of service could text something to that, and they could expect to get some sort of response. They also encouraged via radio the population to make use of social media. Facebook and Twitter were the primary agents. Around the same time, a group of graduate students at Tufts University in Boston said, we want to help. We're not going to be able to go to Haiti. We're not going to help in a traditional way, but we want to help. We're going to repackage a bunch of tools and get everyone we know to help take the data from the texting service, from Facebook, from Twitter, pull it from Haiti, process it, translate it, aggregate it, put it on a map, and send it right back to the responders in Haiti. And so this seems like a huge project, but it was actually done in a dorm room using a piece of software called Ushahidi. And they had an army of over 100 Creole translators from the Haiti diaspora in Boston and New York City to do some of the processing. And it was all done in near real time. Humanitarian Information Network in Haiti would send the information back to Boston. Within a few minutes, information would be sent down, translated, aggregated, and on a map. They passed this newly mapped data with pieces of information to the responders from a variety of different response organizations in Haiti. This was the first time anything like this had happened, in that there was data and it was in near real time, it was geographic, and it was coming from multiple sources, most of them unofficial. Soon arrived the Icelandic search and rescue team. This team arrived with tons of equipment, tons of people, and they started within just a few hours to carefully follow their standard operating procedure to find living people under the rubble and extract them. They started this process until they were contacted by the Humanitarian Information Network and said, "We've received a tweet that we believe is credible that has some information about someone who may be alive under the rubble at this location." The Icelandic search and rescue team said, "What? We have no idea what to do with a tweet. We've never received anything like this before. How do we know if we should trust it? How do we know if we should act?" And the Humanitarian Information Network said, "Well, we have a few sources. They're all pointing to the same incident and the same location. So we suggest you give it a try." The search and rescue group went to the site, and it had been gathering a following for quite a while, especially media. And when they got to this site, there was a circle of several thousand people watching the extraction from the rubble, including media. And if you remember back to that time, there were several incidents in which someone was taken alive from the rubble, and it was seen on television. That was one of these incidents. And so it was very successful, very well publicized. So what do you think happened after that? There were 1,000 people or more standing around, and it became commonly known that if you tweeted that someone was alive under the rubble, someone would come and someone would save you. So what started off as a few hundred texts, tweets, and comments on Facebook that needed to process through the Boston connection to be put on a map, within a few hours had changed to be thousands and thousands, and within an hour it was 10,000. And the people who were newly tweeting about this were tweeting in hope. They may or may not have actual evidence that someone was alive under the rubble, but they had seen it work. They had seen the power of someone using social media to command search and rescue to their own needs. And at this point, these people were desperate. So, what did we learn from that? That moment changed everything about how we think about social media as part of emergency response. What it did, it told us that individuals who are victims and bystanders want to participate in their own rescue, and they expect to be heard the moment that they reach out, that they expect to be heard, they expect to be responded to, just as if it was any other kind of interaction. We learned that we have no capacity to deal with the flood of information. And that was in 2010, so the flood was only 10,000. By the time Hurricane Sandy came up, we were getting 10,000 every second. And so we have now in some of my lab's databases 22 million tweets from an hour of interactions around Hurricane Sandy. And so it has shown us that in order to listen to a community and to social media, we have to be really, really good at managing, well, we say it, drinking from the fire hose. We have to reduce the amount of noise. We have to find what we really need in the stream and respond to that. One of the other things is that we've learned over the years that in terms of the population with social media, they are not necessarily interested in waiting for official response. And if you look at the disruption, I'm going through some of these disruptions, but in a more storied way. Each person is going to share information with their network, and they will inform each other. Now, this could be positive or negative. So another story, which is a little more recent, which on Penn State University campus, about 3 months ago now, there was a bomb threat. There were 6 bombs, well, there were threatened 6 bombs around campus, which we eventually found out they weren't actual bombs, but the report was credible enough that the Penn State Emergency Texting Service sent texts to all faculty, staff, and students who had signed up for the service and gave them very clear instructions on what to do. And most of it was, here's the location of the bomb threat. Please stay away, shelter in place, and it was wait for further information. What do you think the students did? Most of them ignored it, but enough of them started sharing information, and instead of obeying the directives of the emergency services, they ran to the location where the bomb was, or supposedly was, and started taking pictures and uploading it to social media and encouraging their friends to come over too, since none of them had actually seen a bomb before. So, in a way, Penn State could have intervened and stopped this behavior of the students if they had known it was even happening. We knew it was happening, our lab did, because we collect all of that data about social media around campus. But the emergency services didn't know it was happening, and that by the time they released the next text to the emergency texting service, it had already been too late. Students, it was almost an hour later. There were thousands of students all gathering around the different locations, and it had turned into somewhat of a party. So the point is that pre-approved official communications, if they're not immediate, they get circumvented by social media actors. The bystanders are active participants, and they have increased expectations. They engage in communication all day long, especially students, and they expect others to engage with them at the same speed they do. Okay. So what does this mean for PSAPs? PSAPs represent a central node in a decentralized system. The central node is essential, absolutely essential, but it's fragile. And we've seen several instances of this recently. PSAPs have a reactive mandate. A person calls in, a dispatcher receives the call, they evaluate, make a decision, and they dispatch services. So they only come into action once a call has been made. PSAPs have a limited vision of the whole community in that they wait for the call and all the information that they have comes in from that individual call. PSAPs operate one-to-one versus one-to-many and many-to-many. The rest of the world outside of PSAPs is operating on a many-to-many system. And the satellite nodes, which are those individual bystanders and victims and the community members, they will reconnect to each other whether the PSAP is part of that communication or not. So here are 4 examples of social media as 911 disruption just in the last few months. And I'm guessing that you've heard of at least a few of these. The first one I know you've heard of. Texans trapped by Hurricane Harvey used the app Zello to radio for the volunteer Cajun Navy's boat fleet. Mostly, this story is about circumventing 911 when 911 had reached capacity. An individual, and it is part of this could be said, I've called and called and called and called, and all I get is busy signals, and I'm waiting and waiting. And so it could be the impatience of the person who is making the phone call. But there's also another element here in which the individual making the phone call may have a tough decision to make, to say, I only have 10% battery life left on my phone. What action can I take with that 10% battery life to ensure that I'm going to actually get something, that something will come and help me? And so some of them said, you know what, I'm not going to use my 10% battery life on 911. 911 isn't answering. I'm going to use that, what I have left, I'm going to reach out to other networks. Puerto Ricans, similar situation. They used Facebook groups. Mexico City, after their earthquake, they used WhatsApp. And in Mogadishu, again, they used Twitter to maintain hotlines for medical services. So the point of this is that it's already happening. 911 is already being disrupted, and individuals are circumventing it when 911 can't meet their needs or the speed of their needs. Okay, so Mission Critical Partners has asked me to break a couple times for questions because I feel like I'm just going and going and going. So here's one of those moments. Would you like to ask some questions?
Just a reminder to everyone that is on the line today, if you want to ask questions, we encourage you to do so. Use the Q&A function on the upper right-hand corner of your screen. Type in the question and just hit send, and we'll address them as they come through. But at this point in time, we have no questions, Dr. Tapia.
Okay. I'll give it a few seconds.
Okay, we received our first question. Our first question that came in is, how do you control a disruption?
You cannot control a disruption. A disruption, that is part of the definition of a disruption, is that you may not, for example, I would guess that many PSAPs would wish to put the genie back in the bottle. They would hope that social media would just go away and that people would stop using it and relying on it and expect PSAPs to change. But unfortunately, the reality is, and that's why I showed the numbers earlier, is that the disruption, it's already happened. Communication styles across the Western world have already changed. And PSAPs, and the message of today is that PSAPs are already changing. You guys are moving to Next Gen 911 and incorporating text and maybe video and audio, and Mission Critical is helping you do that. And I would say that's a great path. Keep going, because you can't control it. Now, that being said, you can intervene. And I have so many examples of what emergency services could do in moments of crisis that somewhat change their traditional behaviors, but could have intervened to change an outcome. With the bombing story that I just mentioned, if Penn State had sent out an emergency through their texting service, sent out messages every minute, every 3 minutes, that gave, even if it didn't necessarily give more information, that said, we're still paying attention, we're still here, police are still taking action, that it is more of a confirmation of existence rather than an information offering, it would have changed the action of the students. If instead of being a one-way offering, Penn State just merely putting out one text and then waiting, if they had been monitoring the social media around campus, which we kind of do for them, we're part of the Emergency Operations Center at Penn State now. If they had been monitoring and they had seen rumors, seen misinformation, seen bad behavior by students, they could have redirected students the moment they noticed it. And again, through the same mechanism of social media and tweeting. So you can't stop it, but you can intervene.
We did receive 2 additional questions, which I can go through if you think we have time. The first question was, if we suggest citizens use a number to contact help, such as 911, how do we follow up or get to their message when the PSAP is already overwhelmed with calls? Would it be more stressful on the PSAP to have someone monitoring social media during a disaster response?
I'm going to get to the barriers of why it's difficult to make some of these changes in just a moment. But I will say that I already know about the staffing challenges of most PSAPs, and that everybody is already working beyond capacity. And so asking individuals to do more as part of their regular jobs is probably ridiculous. However, partnering with other organizations, there are groups of volunteer organizations, there are groups at universities, there are the potential to hire additional staff, maybe, whose job it is to interact with social media and monitor social media. And we have some software that can make it easier and simpler to do some of this. I think it is possible. Well, I'll put it this way. I think it's essential, and I hope to give some ways that to make it easier for you to get there. If the last part of the question I understood, would it make it worse on the PSAP to monitor social media during a crisis? I think it's worse if you don't. And the example that I gave about the bombing and the inability to interact with the community and know what was going on, I think is a pretty good example.
Okay, and the last question actually that we received is along the same line. So I think at this point we can have you continue on with your presentation, and if it's not addressed, which I think it will be in the next series, I'll come back to it and ask.
Okay, yeah, and I promise to stick around longer if needed to answer all the questions. Okay, so the next question, or the next part of the talk, is about evolving. And this gets to how should PSAPs, what should they become? How should they change and change over the next decade? We could say 1 year, 5 years, 10 years. So what are the advantages of PSAPs or any emergency responders, emergency management using social media? So it provides ongoing collaborative communication with community members. So during downtime, during non-crises, this encourages community members to become more prepared and more aware. During crises, it can gather, analyze, and act on real-time emergency information provided directly by social media users within the community. And most importantly, I think for most public safety people, is improved situational awareness, actionable info, rapid response, post-disaster analysis. And as we have seen in several recent emergencies, Often social media and other kinds of networked information continue operating after others have failed. So it's another way to think about it as a redundant system. So what are the barriers? The emergency response domain. Well, in my college, as I mentioned, medical records, and there's also people who do security, and there's all kinds of different messy problems. And it's people often ask me what makes the emergency response domain unique or interesting. And so some of the things that make it especially hard to solve these kinds of data problems are that in the emergency response domain, the decisions have significant consequences, and maybe even life and death. There's intense public focus or scrutiny. There's significant regulation and mandate. There is a long history and tradition associated with this, with PSAPs. There's limited resources, and there's often a slow budgetary response. So even if you decide today that you'd like to incorporate some tools to help you monitor social media, it might take a year or two to get the budget to be able to manage it, to create it, to support it. So we've done research with public safety entities, emergency operations centers, and PSAPs for about the last 10 years. And if we combine all of the barriers to use over all of that time, this is the list we came up with. And I'm hoping that it resonates with some of you. What are the barriers? There's a lack of sufficient staff and skills. There's a lack of technologies and tools. There's a lack of guidance and policy documents. Trustworthiness and reliability of data, and that the data is not seen as trustworthy. There's definitely an information overload, too much data, too hard to process. The data can be insecure, questions about privacy and security. There is a fear of spreading misinformation or that there will be deception. There's a fear or a concern about contributing to the heightened panic or a heightened panic or hysteria. There are some perceived liabilities of legal issues, and there are legacy systems that have to be dealt with. So, given that social media is something that most PSAPs will use in some way in the future, and there's a strong drive to do so, given that it's hard and that there's a lot of barriers to make that happen, what do you actually have to do? How do you make it work? Well, you must in the future be able to manage vast amounts of data. And that includes bandwidth, storage, backup, and delivery, maybe others. You have to manage data from many sources, heterogeneous data, such as images, videos, sensor data, and lots of different data from different devices, the Internet of Things and smart cities, for example. You have to select data that is relevant and useful. And from that fire hose, that can be particularly difficult. You have to determine the accuracy of the data and the trustworthiness of the source. You have to analyze the data in new ways, fuse the different sources together, display that data visually, and share data and the results of the analyses. Okay, I have another stopping point here for questions, or I can just keep going.
At this point, let's continue on, and then we'll stay around and address all the questions at the end.
Okay. So the third part of this talk is, so now that I've presented that the world is changing and some advantages and barriers to making the change to make use of the data, how can you get help? So one thing that I propose is to narrow the gap between academic research and PSAPs. So universities, we have some advantages that PSAPs can take advantage of as well. The picture on the bottom right, I teach a course called Crisis Informatics, and it is a group of technical students who have decided they want to build tools for emergency management and emergency services. And this is them working with the PSAP that is located closest to Penn State University. So what can they do? Universities can provide the technical expertise, funding, staffing, development, and testing of systems that serve PSAPs. Universities can also provide disaster-like events that can be used as proxies. And I'm sure most of you know what is Penn State most famous for. The answer, of course, is ice cream. But if that wasn't the answer you were thinking of, perhaps it's football. And so football is a disaster-like event in that State College, Pennsylvania, where Penn State University is only about 50,000 students, 50,000 residents, so 100,000 people, and on football Saturdays, it doubles. And so the Emergency Operations Center for the county uses that as a test bed for new technologies, for social media monitoring, for different kinds of incidents response informing, because it is disaster-like, and it's often a proxy. And then the PSAP Public University Partnership is often a test bed for technical innovations, in that we build stuff, they try it, and it doesn't cost our Emergency Operations Center anything. They just need to give us some space and allow us to try things out. The most important thing that universities can offer are students. We have lots of them, and our college requires that every one of them does an internship. And so that provides intelligent, skilled individuals who want to be involved. So my lab, what do we do? And I'm going to just go through these very quickly just so that you'll understand how we work. One of the metaphors that we use is that we as a university laboratory, we're not vendors. We don't build anything that you would ever want to buy. We don't build nice tools. We don't build things that are pretty. It's better to think about a university lab as a messy garage, and that we try things out, break things, try them again, try new things, break them, try them again, fix them, and so on. And so what we most need is people who are willing to let us bring our garage to them. And so we begin with a concept. We identify local social media users and create a local a feed. We understand the information needs of decision makers. We test it, and then we make recommendations for existing tools or new standalone instruments for PSAPs. And I think I'm going to skip ahead just a bit on these. This just defines them even further. If you were to enter a partnership with a research organization, these are the things that you could do. You could make room on the desktop for new images or maps. You could make room on the desktop for new alerts. You could use social media management tools to track, analyze, and document messages. You could use mashups and location services such as crisis maps to provide visual and spatial viewing of social media content, including a layered map such as evacuation zones and shelter locations. Monitor social media channels to assess the manner in which official messages are being received, and quickly correct any misperceptions. I think perhaps the last two are things that many PSAPs are interested in doing. So I am going to skip ahead for a moment to talk a little bit about one project that we have done. And if you see in front of you, this is the Aurora Borealis. And it's just a small and maybe a silly example of some of the kinds of things that our lab does. And so about 4 years ago, NASA came to our lab and said, we would very much like to improve the science of predicting when there will be geomagnetic storms. We want to know how the upper atmosphere is being affected by solar energies. And we want to do space weather. And of course, our group was like, we don't even know what space weather is. And they said, well, why we're coming to you is because we think that communities would participate in giving us alerts as to where the sighting of the aurora borealis is in exchange for an alert that it's above their heads. And so we designed a tool in partnership with NASA where they got scientific information and we got to try building an early warning system in which community members participated in their own creation of a warning. And it may not be a warning for them, it might be a warning for others, but the trade-off was if you agreed to participate in the system, we would send you an alert if the aurora borealis was visible above your head, within 50 miles or 25 miles of your home. And so people said, it's on my bucket list, I want to see it. So the aurora borealis in most of the northern half of the United States is visible once a year, once every 2 years, depending on the solar maximum. So we built this project. It's called the Aurorasaurus Project, and you can look it up, aurorasaurus.com. And what we did, and this is just for this project, but it could be for any project. We gathered ad hoc data indirectly offered by the crowd through social media. And what that means is that we went to social media and we gathered everything that we could that had anything to do with the aurora borealis. Any sightings, any images, any discussions, and we took it indirectly from individuals contributing, meaning that they probably didn't know that they were participating. They were just sharing it with the world. We took all of that data and we filtered it, and we used different kinds of machine learning techniques to reduce the data to something that was directly actionable or to the users. We employed a group of human analysts to further refine the data. So once we had 1 million tweets, we could reduce it to 1,000 tweets. Then we put it in front of a group of human volunteers to bring it down to the most final point of maybe 10 useful pieces of information. We combined that with data from physical sensors. And in this case, they were sensors that were observatory sensors or space sensors, but they could have been anything. They could have been traffic sensors or water sensors or weather sensors. We combined these with direct observations by community participants. And that means people who know they're contributing, who are members of your community, who are sharing data directly with the system. And we transformed all of that into a map and presented it to those that were, in this case, interested in improving prediction for space weather. But it could have easily been those who were making decisions about where to send emergency responders. And then we sent these insights to participants in the form of alerts. So this is just one example of something that we've done. We've worked with hurricane, all the way from earthquakes to hurricanes. We continuously collect emergency response data, and we process it. And our entire goal is to reduce the fire hose to something manageable and to produce tools that allow public safety individuals, emergency services individuals to make choices based on the data that is being presented in the community. So I'll just end here with takeaways. Disruption is already occurring for PSAPs. PSAPs could evolve from reactive to proactive, and I would like to bring academic research closer to PSAP practice.
Thank you so much, Dr. Tapia. I did receive a couple of other questions, and I know that we still have a number of you on the line. So please send your questions in. These questions are excellent questions. So if you can stay on, please feel free to do so. If you cannot stay on, we thank you so much for joining us today. We will be doing our webinar series again in 2018. We've already scheduled our first webinar for January 25th, so keep your eye out for an invitation for that. In the meantime, I will go through some of these questions. The first question is for Dr. Tapia, and the question is, does information collected online need to be part of public record keeping?
Well, yes and no. That is a question for politicians, not necessarily for me. but I will say that it's already being kept. In that there are every Facebook post, every tweet, every instance of Instagram is already being kept. I think the question that you might be asking is, does it need to be kept by you? And I would say no, because it's already being kept. Um, an alternative question would be, should companies who provide social media access and services like Twitter or like Facebook or like Instagram, should they be required to share the information on their sites with public safety individuals? And that is another question that might have more implications, but again, it's more of a political question. If someone calls 911 or calls or texts a PSAP, you are required to keep it and manage it. If you are monitoring social media, it's more like you are walking through a very large, very crowded, very loud ballroom and listening into different conversations. The expectation of you keeping that data that you are monitoring, I think, would be lower than direct contact.
I'll offer to that point too, is that this area of our industry is just at its infancy, and this is yet another area where we have the opportunity to learn more about it, shape the way in which we set expectations, standard operating procedures, shape legislation about what is appropriate for saving and what is not from a records management system perspective.
Excellent. Thank you to both of you. We did receive a couple of other questions, so I'm going to read the next one. You mentioned the reactive role of the PSAP relative to its role in emergency call taking, dispatch, and response. What suggestions would you have beyond social media monitoring for PSAPs to take a more progressive role in the emergency response process?
Well, from the outside looking in, the division between emergency operation centers and emergency management and PSAPs has always seemed a little bit weird. And I know that it's meaningful in your community, but I would say that in order for social media, the burden of monitoring social media and the burden of increasing situational awareness to be done well and carried over many shoulders, I think some of the functions of both need to come together. And I would say that instead of the PSAP thinking themselves as having a very narrow mandate to receive emergency calls, to dispatch emergency services, as to think of themselves as more as, instead of monitoring calls, monitoring communities. And being, even after they receive a call, and I'm not saying replace calls, I'm saying supplement them, add to the knowledge. So when a call comes in, be also able to say, hey, there's a bus accident on I-80. Because of that bus accident, we also have the phone footage from 6 people that were on the bus. We have images. We have 3 people who are online right now who are there, who could give us additional information. We have images, we have video, we have people on the ground, and we can take additional information to have a more complete package, more complete understanding of what's happening rather than just through one phone call.
And I'd offer to answer this question as well, is that we have, I think it's upon us to develop the different use cases that we think that emergency operations can utilize social media, how we want that data to come into the PSAP, what treatment, if anything, that those messages should have prior to arriving at a PSAP or Emergency Operations Center, and then collaborate with the Facebooks, the Twitters, the folks that are doing aggregation services such as, say, Rapid SOS's and Genoa Clearinghouse, and help design what that experience will be.
Excellent, thank you. And we have one more question that came in. Thanks so much to everyone that has stayed on for the questions, and please feel free to keep sending them in. The question is, would you envision PSAPs helping participate in developing these tools for their use, but to not make their use publicly known to the public? Today, the preferred and safe way to contact 911 is through a voice or text call. Do you see that changing soon?
No, if you're speaking just of the mandate, in regards to someone calling for help or texting for help, I don't see those two functions changing. I do see additional functions added to that, and it echoes what I just said before. I don't see people reaching out to 911 directly through social media unless social media becomes part of the PSAP. What I envision in the short term is that each significantly sized PSAP, maybe in an urban area, maybe semi-urban area, would hire a small team of individuals. It could be one, could be several, whose job it will be to interact with social media. And they will do it when there's a crisis and when there's not. They will install software that monitors the community, that identifies kind of a local conversation, receives alerts on that local conversation, and they may even get alerted to incidents before the phone call arrives. In the long term, maybe several years from now, I don't think that individuals will even interact in the way we think via phone or text. I think that we will be using different kinds of mechanisms to communicate with one another, and PSAPs will evolve to include all of them.
Thank you. That was the last question that we received. For everyone that's still on the call, we appreciate your attendance today, and we hope that you found the time useful. We will stay on for a couple of moments to address any more questions that come in. But again, we will be sending out a recording of the webinar today as well as a PDF of the slides. And you can feel free to reach out to us if you have any additional questions when you receive that email. But we'll stay on. Thanks again, everyone. And if we don't speak to you, please have a happy holiday.